Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice-cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate.
April, you're my three-peat. I'm so happy you're here. And you guys, it's official. We celebrated when April was our first repeat. And now April is our first three-peat guest. That really means something. So April, what I did, I think you know this, is I took the data from my previous episodes and looked at all the downloads and did all the math and crunched the numbers, and you spit out as one of our favorites. And since we are approaching our 200th episode, I'm getting back together with some of the fan favorites. So thank you for being a fan favorite.
You're welcome. It's always fun to talk to you, Ashley. You're always awesome.
Yes, birds of a feather, you and I. And I think we could talk forever. And this is going to be an example of how we can talk without even a script, because we're just going to start chatting and see where life takes us. So, but we're going to talk about reports today and really what to do with the report that you get from an evaluation, and then what to ask and how to do that. Before we do that, why don't you give us a little context and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you care.
So my story begins a long time ago. I was thinking about it the other day and talking to a parent, and I realized, I was like, oh, I've worked in that district. And they said, when were you there? I realized, I'm like, oh, it was 25 years ago. I'm like, that's a really long time. So I used to be a teacher many, many moons ago, like you, and I've always been in education, and I loved being a teacher, and I quickly realized that I loved working with kids who were neurodiverse and kids who struggled and kids who excelled but were twice exceptional. And so I became a school psychologist, and I was a school psych for over 20 years, like I was saying, Ashley. And I loved it, but the entire time I was doing it, I just felt like, man, the way we write reports, the way we talk about kids, the language we use, how we work with the families, things at the table are just not productive, and they just don't work very well. So I left the field of school psychology. I became a special education advocate, and I delved into that realm where you are. And I'm not an attorney like you, but I just felt like, I was like, there's a better way to do things. So I formed Rise Educational Advocacy. I work with clients in person virtually, and then I do a lot of fillable templates and workshops, because just like you, I feel like that it's hard for families and teachers. And if we understand better how to ask for things, we can get better results. So that's kind of my story.
So good. And just like everything else you explain, even what you do so well. So, yeah. And I mean, we do have very parallel lives, except the real spin that you can put on things is to put on your school psychology hat. And as I always say to you, I kind of wish that I had gone to school psych, that I had gone and gotten a master's in school psych, because I just think it allows you to think creatively about kids. And I think you kind of talked about this a minute ago when you said, I like the complex cases, the kids that are academic rock stars that might struggle in a different area, and they're therefore twice exceptional or whatever. Not or whatever. They're twice exceptional, period. So help me kind of understand how your school psych background helps you with advocacy, because that's really kind of the foundation to today's topic, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think it helps me because when it comes down to it, as an advocate, when every family has come to me, 90% of the reason why they're coming to me is the IEP isn't working, right? or they're asking for an assessment or they're asking for an IEP and something is going awry. And when I was a school psychologist, one of the first things that we do when we get an initial evaluation or a reevaluation or even a triennial is I look at the history. I do what's called a file review, which I'm sure is what you do all the time, Ashley. And 9 times out of 10, it's because the assessment wasn't done well. And usually that involves the school psychologist, at least for the initial or the comprehensive. And so from an advocacy lens, I look at the assessment and I really tend to look at, okay, what was the reason for referral, which is one of the biggest mishaps and one of the biggest things that kind of clues you into what is the school psychologist doing or what is any assessor doing? And then what does the assessment look like on the inside? And then what do the recommendations say and how are they embedded in the report? So I feel like when the assessments are done better and they're tied to the IEP, then typically that means a better, more robust education plan.
Yeah. And you know what I think is interesting is we'll talk shop here for a second. Like sometimes file reviews are a real chore. And I have kind of come to the realization that file reviews are a real chore when they aren't done well. When the assessment isn't done well, when the data doesn't make any sense based on the goals, when the goals aren't very good, it doesn't make any sense because you're like, well, there's so much to fix here, and I don't have any good information to help me fix it. I'm going to have to dive into the people, which then is a far more creative process. You've got to ask a lot more questions. You've got to get to know the people. You've got to see what resources are available, all of that stuff. So, that report, and maybe when we talk about this, remind me to come back to what do we do with the report itself is just really doesn't help. A crappy report, the crappy report problem.
Yeah. That's a big issue. And just to be clear, the crappy report problem, it isn't dissing school psychologists or any assessor. The truth of the matter is, if you were to go back to school right now, Ashley, and become a school psychologist or do whatever, they're doing a better job now. But in general, they don't teach you they teach you how to test. They don't teach you to look beyond the standardized test scores. And they certainly don't take into account the real crux of the matter, which is functional academics. How is the child doing in the class? And what are we seeing here? And how is this impacting their learning? Because most school psychologists are not teachers. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers is that they're teaching us how to test. They're not teaching us to interpret. And so that is one of the biggest challenges at the table for sure.
Yeah. Jag is on this big kick where he says, it's your fault. It's your fault. And like, it could be the dumbest thing, he's also on a kick where he pees all over the bathroom. And then he'll say, it's Griffin's fault. And we're like, well, we could actually DNA test that, or I could tell you what my eyeballs just saw. It's actually your fault that there's pee all over the floor. And it's your fault that you did that. We are looking at the function of the behavior anymore, kid. Just stop being on the floor. But what I say to him when he says it's your fault, we kind of come up with like rules or mantras or just things that we say a lot. Like, we eat at home because it's healthier and it costs less money because he always wants to go out. So what I oftentimes say when he says it's your fault is it doesn't matter whose fault it is. If there's a problem, we can work together to find a solution. And I think that's so important in special education advocacy. We're off topic here, but just to address what you just said, I mean, like, it doesn't necessarily matter how the reason why the report is quote unquote crappy, which is one word to represent paragraphs of what we mean. What matters is what can we do to resolve it? Because we at the end of the day, we're trying to curate the education for a child, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And part of the issue is not just the assessor, the school psychologist, or the speech pathologist. When I was a school psychologist, and I know for many other providers, it's the same way, the parents are like, I want testing. And so I would get a request letter and I'm like, okay, what do I give? And in school psychology land, we call it the standardized battery because we're told, okay, give this IQ GIF, give this processing. And I felt like that was just not a good idea. And so I would call the parent and say, well, what are you thinking? What does it look like? What disabilities do you suspect? What are the areas of need? And then I would customize my testing based on that. And then it meets all the IDA law. But the bigger issue is the parent is now understanding what to ask for. And I feel like that is the other piece of the pie that's missing there, is that, yeah, the assessors are giving the standardized battery, but if we don't know what to test for, then we don't have a choice. So it's also empowering the parents to say, I can ask for these types of evaluations or these areas of need. And then the assessor's like, oh, mom wants this kind of testing. Now I can test in here instead of I'll just give my regular battery because I don't know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's dive in because I think that's so important, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Before we dive into that more, because I love that, let's talk about what the report actually is. Like, where does the report fall into the evaluation, eligibility, reevaluation um, context?
Yeah. So you mean like in terms of the cycle of special education?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are like, why do we get these reports? What are they for? What purpose does the evaluation report have in special education? Because let's be honest, the people that are listening to this, probably statistically haven't read a third of any report they've ever gotten.
Right, right. And the reports are too long and they're difficult to understand. I mean, that's the truth. So there's so many people, there's a lot of myths when it comes to special education evaluation. So myth number one is the purpose of an assessment is to determine eligibility. It's like, that's one of the purposes, but that's not the only one. The real purpose is several areas. So one of the areas is to determine the areas of need for educational programming, regardless of whether or not they qualify. Another area is to determine, okay, what does a child have in terms of data, and then be able to craft an education plan or what other types of intervention. Another is to address child find, which is the district's obligation to search and serve and identify and locate and assess kids. Another area is if the team needs more information. So if the child is really struggling or the team is like, we want to put your child in SDC. Well, before they make that recommendation, they probably need more data. Where do we get that? An assessment. So that's another reason why to do it. So a purpose of an assessment is to determine what's happening, what it looks like, how does it look, and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Strengths and needs, and how we can curate a plan around it. Yeah, and I think we miss that a lot. So then let's go back to the previous topic, which is how parents can help to get a good report in the very beginning by talking about what we're going to evaluate. I love for people to know that you can Google evaluation planning, California, special education evaluation planning form, California, Idaho, New Jersey, wherever you are. And that'll probably get you on the right track to find the form that they're filling out while you're sitting looking at the back of their laptop. I mean, do we ever even know that we could get an evaluation for something like pragmatic language or a work inventory or something like that? I think just having the form in front of you helps, right? But fine. Bigger question, how can parents help to shape the evaluation itself?
Yeah. This is a great question. I actually did a YouTube tutorial on how to request for testing. So when it comes to requesting for testing, regardless of it, whether it's the first time you're a parent and you're like, I'm finally going to do it, or things are going terribly, I want a reevaluation or a supplemental evaluation, it doesn't matter. There's 5 steps. So the first step is understanding, what do you ask for? And just like you pointed out, Ashley, is if you go to your state's website, a lot of times there's golden nuggets inside. And one of the golden nuggets you want to look for is, what is the area of eligibility or related services you want tested? So if you know that your child has dyslexia and you're like, okay, I want them tested for a learning disability, you need to know the eligibility reason. The reason why is if you don't know what to ask for, it's going to be very hard to get it. So you need to look at your state website for whatever area. If you want speech, OT, they're usually listed there. If they're not listed there, especially for the related services, usually the organization's listed on their website. And so you'll want to look there. Then step two is
form.
eligibility form for sure.
In legal terms, we call that writing the jury instructions before we write the complaint, before we sue somebody. So what you're saying is look at the eligibility form before you plan the evaluation. Hugely important. That's how I start all of those meetings with my clients. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And
So knowing what to ask for. The step two is, in order to request an assessment, there needs to be a need for, specially designed instruction, and you have to justify it with okay, I suspect these disabilities or related services, and these are the areas that I want to test. So you need to kind of tell the school or tell the assessors, I would like an evaluation in these areas, cognitive, academic, or auditory processing, or I would like a speech and language or a counseling or a transportation assessment or an assessment to determine if my child needs a one-to-one aid. There's an assessment for that. You have to put it into writing, and then you have to justify it by saying, here is the evidence, right? Here is all the private evals that I've done. Here's the hours and hours that I've had my child do private tutoring. And you attach that to your request. And then if it's an initial evaluation and you've never had your child tested before, you always want to request for a meeting. And the reason why I say that, Ashley, is because otherwise you're going to get kind of the standard response, which is, oh, we'll wait and see, or, maybe we'll do it later. Or if you don't put into writing, you want your child tested. And this has happened to so many of my clients. The school's like, that's so cool. They want to be tested. Okay, we'll put them into our tier 1 or tier 2 intervention. And they just blow you off. Yeah. And as a parent, I've had so many parents that are like, I asked for testing. I said, how did you ask? And they said, I told them, or I put it in an email. And I said, it has to be a certain way. So you submit your letter, you tell them what you want, you ask for a meeting. If your child already has an IEP, you can ask for an IEP or say, I would like to meet with the case carrier. And then the key is you develop a jointly developed assessment plan. What do I mean by that? I mean, before they give you the permission to assess, assessment plan, whatever your state calls it, you talk to the assessors and you're like, I'm seeing this, Ashley. I'm really worried about this as a mom. I would like types of assessments that would address this. Can you do this? And then the assessor is like, oh. And then they give you an assessment plan that's hopefully in the area, the ballpark that you're asking for, whether it's OT eval or speech, or maybe some specialized IQ testing. It really kind of helps hone in. It helps to tell the school what you're asking for. And then when you get the assessment plan, hopefully it's in the areas of need. So knowing what to ask for and how to get it, it kind of takes these steps in the beginning. But then, Ashley, I feel like you get a better assessment. The team knows what you're asking for, and hopefully you get an evaluation report that's kind of what you were asking for in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is why you're so popular. Your brain is like a textbook. You get topic sentences, and then you give supporting details, and then you go back to a topic sentence, and you're so easy to follow. I mean, we could take that transcript and make a book out of it. That was so helpful, and it's literally step by step as to how I take people through evaluation. This is why you're so popular. Thank you for that. So you get the report, right? They go out, they do the testing, blah blah blah. Then you get the report. What do parents do with the report? Because I'm telling you, I get reports, you get reports all day long from parents, and you say, well, is there anything, when I get one, I used to try to say, is there anything in the report that you really love, or you really think you would hang your hat, or anything that you think is extremely problematic? And what I always think is funny is they read the observation data and they get really upset about the observation data. But then they don't read the testing data, the objective testing data. And so, if you say, well, did they do a academic test or a cognitive test? And then folks don't know. And I think it's because it's intimidating. And I agree with you that all of the words in it really don't mean a whole lot to me. I just go straight to the charts.
Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right. And it's true. And on the school psychology side, we experience the blowback too. What does the blowback look like? For years and years, I prided myself on writing really long reports. And I was like, okay, I feel good about this. I spent, 20 hours on a report. It's 40 pages long. What would happen to me as a school psychologist? And if your school psychologists are listening or your assessors are listening, they're going to nod their head. They would look at my report. Thank you so much, April. They would cast it aside and say, we're writing the IEP. But what all my testing? What happened? It's because it's not connected. And a lot of times the team doesn't know how to connect it. So when it comes down to writing the report as a mom and as a listener, you want to look at kind of 3 different areas. The first is, one of my tricks and hacks is that I start by looking at the end of a report first, because the end is usually like the gold area. The end is going to be the eligibility determination, which we already talked about earlier, which is one aspect. Do they qualify? But the other aspect that you should see at the end is recommendations that need to be relevant, specific, and useful. So you'll want to see a summary, like, what does this mean? You'll want to see strengths. What can the child do? What can they not do? How does the, disability, how does it impact them? And then you'll want to see like all of this data kind of synthesized into, what do I do? And then you're going to want to go to the beginning of the report and see the reason for referral. The reason for referral is not just the child is being referred for testing. That's not legit. It's actually an inappropriate assessment. It needs to say, why is the child being assessed? What are the eligibilities we look at? What was the reason for referral? What was the interventions done before? And all of that kind of needs to be blended into the report, whether it's a triennial, a related service evaluation, or an initial, or whatever. So all of that needs to be put together. And then in the middle of the report, you look at the standardized test scores, like what you're saying, but you also look for the golden stuff, which is, okay, what does that mean when they performed on a WISC or like an IQ test? How does this impact them functionally, right? Or what was their mastery on this, and this concept? And then it should be tied together. So there's kind of like the 3 areas to report, and the report structure can vary. Some school psychs will do it like a very particular way. We do the background, we do the IQ, we do the academics. Others I'll see do a more person-centered or strength-based report, which is kind of like strengths and weaknesses. It doesn't really matter, honestly. The bigger issue is like explaining what the tests mean, not just using AI or using computer-generated reports that only interprets the standardized test scores, but really, what do we see? How are we cross-validating it? And how can we develop an education plan that's useful?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, couldn't agree with you anymore. And if people can only focus on one part, I completely agree. But the recommendations down there at the end, that's what the whole report's supposed to be. And I really think that that's why why school people miss it too. Now, the one thing I will say is, ed psychs are really good and really knowledgeable. And a lot of times it's the system that either their district blatantly tells them not to put certain stuff in reports, or they don't have the time, or, whatever. So it's systematic, bureaucratic reason as to why sometimes things happen. But what I'll do is I'll look for something that makes me curious. Like, if a child has dyslexia and we already know it and their working memory is really great, I'm like, that's odd. That doesn't happen very often. Can you peek out for me? And I oftentimes say, will you reconcile this with that? Or maybe a prior test score is really different than other test scores. Can you help me reconcile why their reading comprehension on the same test, like the Wyatt or something like that, went down 5 points from 3rd grade? And do you have any insight into that? That kind of thing. What other things do you recommend that people do with the report? What do we do with that report?
Those are really good questions. What do we do with the report? Well, first of all, when you're a parent, before you come to an eligibility meeting, and that for your parents that don't know, that usually happens like if you're doing an initial and maybe even triennial, that sort of happens first. It could be a separate meeting or together, but that's kind of the first part. So before you walk in the door, first of all, you don't want to read that assessment on the fly. It doesn't matter how good you are. Like when I did it for 20 years, I still take a few minutes to look for a report. It's stressful, it's overwhelming, so you can ask for drafts. So you always want to ask for a draft report before, so you can take time. The second thing you want to do is kind of look at the report, Ashley, and say, okay, here's the areas my child excels in. Those are strengths. And we can capitalize on the strengths on, let's say they have an IEP, and we can put those into accommodations or other areas for the setups of the goals. And then you also look at, okay, what are the areas of need? Those areas that are identified need to be addressed in the IEP. So the bigger picture is not just seeing the report, but like, what does it say on the IEP? So on the present levels page, there should be stuff in there for the child is exhibiting this, and these are the setups that would help them achieve and do better. And so you want to see that what's in the report is sort of interpreted or synthesized or summarized on the present level section. And then you want to see where else is that in the report. So a lot of times, Ashley, I'll see these like beautiful recommendations on a psych report, and then nothing is in the IEP. Under the present levels page, it's like they got this IQ score. Well, gosh, that's not going to help anybody develop a good education plan. So you want to see it kind of embedded into the IEP. And then you also want to, as a parent, write what I call a parent report. So when I talk about a parent report, I tell parents, okay, you are not a school psych, you're not a special ed teacher, but you have so much data. Why can't your stuff get onto the IEP? You work with your child every day. You take them to therapy after school. You work with them. You have a lot of information. You don't need to have a credential to write a parent report, and you can attach that to the IEP. That's powerful stuff. And that also means that you can talk about the data that you have at home and what the school can do about it, to interpret that and put that in the educational plan too.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. That's the heart and soul of it. And I think that's so missed, but you make this so easy for people. In fact, April, I know you make this even easier. So why don't you talk about some of the resources? You have resources, right? Where people can like communicate some of this stuff to school. Do you have like fillable documents or something?
I do. I have two different ways. So I have workshops, online workshops. They're you can do them in about a day, and they show you what to ask for and how to do it. I have a workshop on how to request testing, IEP meetings, understanding reports, and parent participation that shows you how to do it. I also have on Teachers Pay Teachers, I have fillable guides that show you the step-by-step how to request for an initial assessment, a supplemental assessment, how to ask for a meeting. Because just like you and I were talking about before, Ashley, we parents make the best advocates, but if we don't know what to ask for, it's just overwhelming. And so I really feel like that it's so much easier when you have the tools and the resources. So I have those kind of two avenues for parents to get what they need quickly and easily, because Google, you just go down the rabbit hole and you're like, oh, put in my letter. So I definitely have those to help make it better.
So good. So good. So people can find you. What's the name of the TPT store?
Rise Educational Advocacy.
Awesome. And I know your Rise Educational Advocacy on Instagram too.
And YouTube. We got a YouTube channel now.
Awesome. And a website too, right?
Yes, it's riseeducationaladvocacy.com.
April, you are such a gift to our community, both wide disability community, as well as our community here at Ashley Barlow Company. Thank you for celebrating with us.
You're welcome. It's always fun to be with you. A&A.
A&A, together forever.